Books I Borrow, and this is video number 7 in the series. And I remind you that this series, which is quite rare in the whole load of my videos, is in fact devoted to books I borrow from the university library in Tours, and which I talk about without having read them yet. So it's really about borrowing books, explaining why I'm borrowing them, what's the story behind the very fact of borrowing the book, and then very quickly talking about these various books that I haven't read yet. The last video in the series dates back to November, I think, in the very midst of the second lockdown. And of course, on that day, I was in my office at the university with my mask on. Here I'm at home, and I'm going to talk to you about books I borrowed yesterday. The university library is still open. It closes next Friday, I think, on July the 23rd. And I had the opportunity to borrow some of the books I had planned to work on along with other books through the summer. And most of these books are actually books I ordered, which means that I asked the librarians to buy these books, and now I'm going to introduce them to you. So yesterday, among other things, I borrowed two novels by Tara Junwinch. And Tara Junwinch is a half Aboriginal Australian writer. I read The Yield, which is, I think, a latest novel, a latest fiction, in the spring, I think, 3 or 4 months ago. And I talked about The Yield in one of the Je range mon bureau videos. And so I've been curious, and I wanted to read other titles by Tara Junwinch. So here they are, and everyone and anyone who's a regular subscriber to the university library in Tours can also borrow them. The reason why I went to the library yesterday is because I had to cap up, more or less, a new class for next October. It's only one-shot class for a master math, and I had to prepare a whole series of documents around the various notions of ecofeminism, decolonial studies, post-colonial studies, and deterritorialization. So this is a general work, a general series of documents which I'm going to work on. I think only 1 week with a master math, and I had decided to focus on the Green Belt movement in Kenya, and of course, first and foremost, on Wangari Maathai, the Nobel Peace Prize winner in 2004, and she died in 2011. That's 10 years ago already. And I already mentioned Wangari Maathai, I think, in one of these videos, and she's a very prominent activist and author and sociologist, and her books are very valuable and really worth reading. They have been translated into French, so you can also try to grab them in French and to read them in French. And this is a autobiography entitled Unbowed, a memoir. I think it's been translated into something like La femme qui plantait des arbres or something like that. I didn't check. And this is the challenge of Africa, which is less personal and which is more of a general, overall, broad study of what lies in store for Africa in the globalized context of ecofeminism and post-colonialism in the 21st century. So these are really books that are very high on my priorities at the moment. Again, I read these books a few years ago, and I'm working on them again. This has nothing to do with my main area of studies, Chains of Babylon, the rise of Asian America, and this and the other book here, The Heartbeat of Struggle by Yuri Kochiyama, The Revolutionary Life of Yuri Kochiyama. This is a biography of Yuri Kochiyama, and this is interesting because this is a take on the civil rights movement in the United States in the 20th century, with the very specific case of Asian Americans and how they fought alongside with and together with African Americans for more civil rights. And this is a story which is very often erased or at least downplayed. And this is something I haven't read much about, and I'm not a specialist in American civilization or American history or even about the civil rights movements. So it's pretty normal that there are things I don't know about, I haven't read about. But I read a few articles about these books, and I decided to have the library buy them so that I could read them, but also so that students and other scholars could benefit from that. And the last book I borrowed yesterday was more or less on the spur of the moment because it was, I don't even know how to say, on display, I guess. I was about to say sur les présentoirs. I have no idea how to say that in English, I guess. Yes, it was on display in the main room. And this is a translation from the German, but it's by a Swiss author called Arnaud Caminich, and this is published by Quidam Éditeur, and the translator is Camille Lucher. And the reason why I borrowed Cesner is because something like 7 or 8 months ago I read Ustrinkata, which has also been translated by Camille Lucher and published by Quidam Éditeur. And I found that this was a book, it's a very short text, like this one, which is very short and which I haven't read yet. It's a very short text, and I found Ustrinkata really disturbing and engaging and mind-boggling in many ways, especially with the use of the language and how the language of the people and the various languages of Switzerland more or less conflate or are in conflict in the very material of the text. And I thought that this was really an interesting writer I would like to read more from, so this is why I borrowed this. And that's all for the books I borrowed yesterday, so I'm going to cheat a bit and I'm going to talk to you about books I borrowed a few weeks, something like 2 or 3 weeks ago, still with the idea that this was, of course, for summer work, because scholars also work in the summer. And of course, there are dozens and dozens of books that I have borrowed, read from, read completely, over winter and over spring, in which I haven't mentioned in these videos because I very seldom shoot these books I borrow videos. But the reason why I want to talk about that is because there are a lot of books that I have ordered from the library and that I've borrowed from the library, some of which I've already given back, in fact handed back. And the main reason for all of this activity is because I am preparing, and I'm very busy preparing, next year's class, agrégation class, on Alexis Wright's Carpentaria. Now, I have never mentioned, really, I haven't mentioned yet Alexis Wright or Carpentaria, but the reason why I'm reading all of these books, and I'm going to talk about all of these books as well, and there might have been more, so you shouldn't be too frightened with that. The reason why I'm reading all these books is because, of course, I need to read a lot on Aboriginal history, on Aboriginal creation, on textualities that come from the decolonial Aboriginal movement as well, because Alexis Wright is an Australian Aboriginal writer, possibly the best known or one of the foremost Aboriginal Australian writers, First Nations, which is a more correct way of putting it, First Nations Australian writer. And I have started reading quite a lot of fiction and poetry by Australian First Nations writers and poets, and mostly, in fact, female women writers from Australia, contemporary or not so contemporary, let us put it that way, 20th century and more contemporary writers. And I'm also reading, of course, a lot of essays and a lot of scholarly papers and articles. This is the anthology of Australian Aboriginal literature, which was edited by Anita Heiss and Peter Minter in 2008. So that's more than 10 years ago. And this very interesting compilation or anthology was published by McGill Queen's University Press. And I really recommend it because it's really a first point of entry into the very, very wide bulk of Australian Aboriginal creation, especially literary creation. What is interesting is also that they include, this anthology include texts from the 18th and 19th century, some of which cannot be considered or are not generally considered literary in the purest sense of the term, but they are documents and they are texts that bear witness to what happened and to what happened, of course, in the context of colonization and colonial expansion by the British, and of course the expropriation and the near eradication of Aboriginal rights and Aboriginal culture. So this is really a very commending anthology. The cover is really bad because there is a boomerang on it, and there is a poem by Ujaru Nonukal, who is a foremost poet, from the second half of the 20th century. And Ujaru Nonukal, I mean, one of the poems by her which I like best is entitled "No More Boomerang." Okay. So no more boomerangs, so please no boomerangs on the covers of books either. A writer I've already read books by, Melissa Lukashenko, is also an Aboriginal Australian writer, and this is I think one of the latest which I hadn't read, so I ordered it from the library. Natalie Harkin, I think, is an Aboriginal poet. I haven't had time to check. I don't know why I put it on the bibliography, but I will certainly understand better once I've started reading. Oh yes, I know why. Yeah, it's most of the collection is about land rights, Aboriginal land rights, and the fight and the fights against mining companies, which is such an important feature in Alexi Wright's Carpentaria. So that's the reason why. Okay, Natalie Harkin, Dirty Words, and this is a poetry collection spanning from A to Z, and the various titles of the various poems begin with A, B, C, D, and so on and so forth. And there are also prose poems apparently, and there is this final section, very short section of very short prose poems. I'll tell you more about it later. Now, these books are part of the very many collections of articles, scholarly essays I have started reading in order to prepare for this class and for this agrégation course on Alexi Wright's Carpentaria. This is a post-colonial translocations, cultural representation and critical spatial thinking. And of course, in this collection, which is very theoretical, and I haven't started reading it yet. I've just leafed through it, scanned through it. There is one important paper by Linden entitled Translocal Temporalities in Alexi Wright's Carpentaria. So here we go, and this is why, of course, this book is with me this summer. And for the same reason, Performing Identities, Celebrating Indigeneity in the Arts, edited by Jeffrey Davis, among other prominent scholars, and Gian Devi and Chakravarti. And here again, there are two papers about Carpentaria, and notably one which compares Alexi Wright's Carpentaria with a movie I have never heard about, but I'm not a specialist of Australia or of Aboriginals, Warwick Thornton's Samson and Delilah. And there is a paper also about reconstruction of Australia through Aboriginal imagination in Alexi Wright's Carpentaria. Here it is. So you see. So that's my homework, yet again, over and over. And other books by Aboriginal writers, Claire Coleman, Terra Nullius, which was a real bestseller a few years ago. I think she was granted, awarded, or possibly just shortlisted, I don't know, for the Miles Franklin Award. I couldn't say. It doesn't really matter. But but this is really the first novel by Claire Coleman, and I really wanted to read it. I hope I will have time enough to read all of this before October or November, but I'm not completely sure about that. The class begins. I start teaching the class in Carpentaria in September the 8th. So very, very early in September. But I know I will go on reading all through the months that follow. And this is Taboo by Kim Scott. And Kim Scott is also a prominent, one of the major voices in Aboriginal Australian literature. And I haven't read it yet either. So this is the big pile. I mean, part of the big pile, because there are other books in my office here at home and in my study. So if it's in the house, it's a study. There are other books in the library and study here at home, and there are a few books as well in my office at the university. So this is just part of what I have borrowed for creative work, I don't know how to put it, over the summer. Okay, try to have a nice day, a nice week. Stay clear of the fucking virus, and and try to rest. For those of you who have a few weeks or a few days holidays, well then try to enjoy those, and see you later on.